Okay.
All right, it's all yours.
Good. So thanks everybody for joining. Thought this was a really good turnout. Thank you very much for jumping in on this Zoom. I'm Mary Ellen, the chair of the Conservation Commission, and I also have been working on the Sustainable Connecticut team with Richard, and Richard Post and I and a couple other folks have been trying to get sustainable CT certification for the town, and we've done an awful lot of good things over the years that we're finally going to get credit for. But one of the things that we thought that we could all kind of enhance a bit is just some outreach and education. And Mike Dietz offers these great workshops and programs through UConn on low impact development, and we had invited him to come to Trumbull, and we had something set up in the library, and then the virus hit. So we canceled everything and then thought, well, Zoom seems to be taking off a lot lately, and Mike said he would be happy to do a Zoom. So we thought that this would be a really great kind of an in-house staff and board and commission program. So this is not open to the public, but just an opportunity for Mike to share with us some of the more innovative things that we're doing in the state of Connecticut, and then maybe to specialize and get some specific Trumbull data on some land use changes that he's seen. So I'll just open this up to Mike, and thank you for everybody for joining.
All right, it's my pleasure. I'm glad this finally worked out. We've done a couple of these so far, and in this format. And although I do miss the face-to-face, we should be making do. So the only thing that will be a little tough for me to do while I'm presenting is if somebody has a question, I won't really be able to see it as my screen will be filled up with the PowerPoint. So we can, I'll pause here and there and ask if anybody has a question, and that way you can just ask at that point, or obviously we'll have time at the end for that too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then. Does that look okay? Everybody see the first slide? Yes? Okay. All right. So I'm going to start out with a bit of some background information. And forgive me if you know a lot about stormwater already. I just kind of need to make sure everybody's on the same page with very few slides on background stuff. Then I'll go through what low impact development practices are and some of the innovative things that are available for you guys to use in your town. So if we think back to what's happened historically with our waters throughout the history of this country, really in other parts of the world too, it's pretty foreign these days to see waters in the kind of condition that this guy finds this water in when he sticks his hand in and oil comes out of it, that's been floating on the surface of that water. And then of course we have one of the many fires that happened on the Cuyahoga River, but the one that captured national attention was this one here. And these were events that really catalyzed and coalesced people around the environmental movement and made our legislators and everyone that was paying attention, force them to really do something about it. So what happened as a result of that was PL 92-500. And as many of you may be aware, that's also known as the Clean Water Act, but the formal name is the Water Pollution Control Amendments of 1972. So 1972 happens to be a very good year I was born. So there I am there, and you can see by looking at me in my little frame here that I obviously had more hair in that picture than I have now. So some bad things have happened over the course of this lifetime. But as far as water is concerned, major improvements have taken place in our country and certainly in Connecticut as a result of the Clean Water Act. And just as an aside, that was that act, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Acts were proposed and initiated under a Republican administration, but passed with strong bipartisan support because there were so many people, such a grassroots effort that wanted this to. So it's really hard to imagine this bipartisan effort making something positive happen for everyone, but that's really the way that it was. So just a quick slide here. You know, we're seeing more and more of these stories about waters that were, you know, looked at those first slides that were so grossly polluted that nothing would survive in there, to now places like this. Here's a picture of a story from Illinois. They're talking about a sport fish recovery, and they call out the Clean Water Act specifically. So that act and what it regulated, the point sources of pollution, the factories, the sewage, raw sewage that was being discharged into our nation's waters unregulated, that's what the Clean Water Act addressed. So those point sources have really been cleaned up, and the results have been striking. But unfortunately, we still have a ways to go. So what we're dealing with now is what we call non-point pollution. So this is runoff from diffuse sources from agricultural and urban areas. I'm only going to be focusing on the urban stuff tonight, obviously, but agricultural runoff is also a form of non-point pollution. Combined sewer overflows also factor into this because there's an input from the stormwater system that causes those overflows. So I'm not going to talk too much about those tonight, although I can answer questions about them if anybody has a question on those. But the stormwater stuff that I will be talking about certainly plays a role in those combined sewer overflows. So what really is driving these issues that we're faced with right now with non-point pollution are impervious surfaces. So these are surfaces, our parking lots, roadways, driveways, rooftops, anything that water cannot pass through. So I'll just give you a little progression here. So this is just a representation of an undeveloped watershed. So not far from Trumbull, you know, you go up into the hills a bit, and you can get into some very pretty areas where, you know, there's no houses, some nice state forest, perhaps some nice tracts of undeveloped land. And a stream that drains a watershed like that would likely look something like this. So we have lots of good cover over that stream, the good forests, you know, trees holding that bank intact. So it really is resilient to flooding. The trees shade that river to keep the temperature lower, so the native species that would be surviving here can still survive. And there's nice pool and riffle structure if you like to go fishing, especially trout fishing. You know that that's nice habitat for trout. Next, we go down, we'll go one tick up the scale here of urbanization. So we have some subdivisions, a few roads, okay? So a watershed like this might have a river that drains it that looks something like this. So a little bit different. We can see this parking lot very close to the banks of the river here. We see this armoring of the banks, these stones that are installed here, because we've started to see some changes take place in the hydrology because of all that impervious surface in the watershed. We don't have as much cover over that stream, keeping it cool in the summer so it warms up quicker. So these are just a few of the things that you can see here. And the shape of the stream tends to get more channelized and straightened as well. So a little more developed. So this particular one is from West Hartford. So here, if you ever venture up that way and you've seen the exit off of Route 84 for Trout Brook Drive, if you look at the concrete lined channel here and you like to fish for trout, you probably know that there aren't going to be too many trout in Trout Brook these days. All right, when we see all this armoring of the channels, you're losing all the habitat for the aquatic life, and it's really not supportive, or not very supportive at all. And then lastly, the most extreme example. So this is a postcard of Bushnell Park in Hartford from 1905. So here's the Soldiers and Sailors Arch, and here's the park right here, the Capitol, obviously. And if you've been to Bushnell Park, perhaps you're saying, I don't remember that river being underneath that bridge, and you're correct, unless you were there before the 1950s. That was when the Park River was put underground because of major flooding that happened in 1950s and earlier that devastated the city. So they channelized the Park River and put it in a conduit underneath the city, and so this is what the Park River goes through today. So really no opportunity for aquatic life to survive down in those kinds of conditions, as you would imagine, okay? So this is just a visual representation of those changes that have taken place. Again, here's that undeveloped watershed. And this is going to be, there are going to be two graphs here. So this represents ones. So the time is on the bottom, maybe over the course of a day or so. And on the left-hand axis here, you'll see the flow rate. I have CFS, that's cubic feet per second, but it really doesn't matter. The flow rate is the volume of water per unit of time. So if we have a rainfall event happen on that undeveloped watershed, we might see a response that looks something like this. So we have this base flow level in the stream. You see a gradual climb up, a slow tailing off of that flow rate in that stream. For that very same rainfall event on a watershed that has a lot of development in it, like this one that you're seeing here, the very same rainfall event, we would see a very different response in that stream. So we would see much more runoff and a higher peak rate of runoff. So there's more volume coming out and it's coming off faster and it's getting there quicker. All right, so the timing of it has shifted too. So major changes to the hydrology, and this also drives changes in the quality of those waters too. So this is some data from the state of Connecticut. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection did some sampling a number of years back in watersheds around the state, and they looked at the amount of impervious cover in the watershed. So that's what you see along the bottom scale here, from 0 to 30%. On the left-hand side, this is the macroinvertebrate multimetric index. So this is it's an estimate of how, what kind of bugs they're finding, macroinvertebrates they're finding in that stream. And there's certain bugs that are intolerant of pollution. So a high macroinvertebrate MMI means that it's healthy water. All right, so above 55 means that it's healthy for aquatic life. And in these low ranges of impervious cover, we see quite a few that are above that. We still see some that are below, so there's a lot of variability in this low percentage of impervious cover. However, once you get around 12%, there are no sites that met the aquatic life criterion. So above 12% impervious cover, which is not very much impervious cover, the aquatic life was not doing very well at all. So there were major impacts to the small bugs that are in that stream, and those are the basis for the food chain of aquatic life. So can you still hear me okay, Mary Ellen? I see somebody just came into the waiting room. I assume Bill will let her.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So I'll just give you a quick view from above that will set the some of the Trumbull specific information I'll share with you here. So some of my colleagues at the Center for Land Use Education and Research have put together some satellite data that looks at what the land cover in each pixel is. So these are 30 meter by 30 meter pixels, so pretty coarse, like 100 feet square, but it's useful when you look at a large area like this over the entire state of Connecticut. So this is the link for those data here if you'd like to check it out. But what this represents, the red pixels that you can see here are developed lands. All right, so each pixel, the software makes a decision as to whether it should be classified as developed or deciduous forest or evergreen forest. The green pixels are the forest classes, as you can see. But you kind of get the idea where our development is in the state. So around the center here, we've got Hartford and East Hartford. Down along the coast, we can see New Haven. Further down southwest, you can see the Bridgeport cluster here, and you guys are obviously just north of that. So over the course of 30 years, from 1985 to 2015, in the state of Connecticut, over the whole state now, this is what happened. So 155 square miles, not acres, square miles of developed land were added in the state in that 30-year period. 80 square miles of turf and grass. So the turf and grass, as you would imagine, goes along with residential development. When you have houses and sidewalks, you get lawns to go with it. So where did it come from? These things, they have to be at the expense of something else. So we lost agricultural fields, about 70 square miles, and 180 square miles of forest, the green one here. So you can see how this shook out over a 30-year period across the state. Pretty scary. If we compress all that development into one corner of the state, it would fill up Litchfield County, and turf and grass would fill up Middlesex County. So quite a large area when you look at it across the state. So now in Trumbull, so on the bottom of the slide here, you can, I'm assuming obviously you guys are going to have the recording, but I'll also send Mary Ellen a copy of the PowerPoint, so the links will be there so you can access those. So this is what's called Connecticut's Changing Landscape. So you can zoom in on your town and click on it and get some information about it. So this is just that image of 2015 of your town. So you can see some forest pixels here, the greens, but you guys have a fair amount of developed areas and turf and grass in there. Okay, so that's just a visual representation of it. And then if you look at the numbers here, I'm not going to go through these in detail. They're very small. I mostly put this here just for your reference, so you can take a look at it afterwards if you'd like. What is perhaps the most interesting is the pie chart on the top right there. So you can see there's your breakdown for 2015. So your developed lands in the town of Trumbull are about 44% of your total land area. Your forest, let's see, deciduous forests and coniferous together are about 32%. So that's your green, about a third of the town. And then about 20% is turf and grass. All right, so 4% impervious or developed land is a really high percent. If you look at it, you know, as far as averages across the state, that's one of the more developed towns that we see. And then if you look at what changed in the town from 85 to 2015, here's how it shook out for you all. So the numbers are small. Again, I'm not going to force you to look at those numbers in the table down there. I just put that for your reference. But what happened here, you added 704 acres of developed land. You added 229 acres of turf and grass. And you lost 145 acres of other grass. And you lost 731 acres of forest land. All right, so you can kind of see how it all, the game adds up and subtracts out over the course of time. So that's a decent amount of impervious land, you know, or developed land added in a 30-year period. So maybe I'll just pause there for a second and see if anybody has any questions about that before I move on. Is that surprising? I'm sure that just like other parts of the state, the past few years since the recession, stock didn't see a ton of growth. So I would say since 2012 or 15, probably haven't had a huge growth spurt in the state like we have in some parts of our past. But we all are well aware of the building booms that happened in the 1980s and 90s around here.
Good.
So I'll if there are no questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Marshall.
Okay. We are a fully developed town. Okay. There's virtually no undeveloped land. We're at a tear down and rebuild stage.
Gotcha.
Okay. And I know as I've sat through zoning hearings and things, we're looking for changes so that what's being done will take the groundwater, not have runoff, to take care of those changes. So looking at really what happened until 2008, where we reached fully developed, I don't get as nervous because we don't have the acreage to lose anymore.
Yep. Okay.
Development. Changing whatever is being built on developed and redeveloping land, because I think that's the stage. We're mature. There are other areas of the state that have land to build on. Nobody's going to put up a 200 home development because it doesn't exist here. Right. So that's my concern. I just, don't get crazy about what happened from 85 to 2005 is over with, and there's no opportunity to do that again in Trumbull.
Yep. Okay. That's good. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about today, I have some information in here that I think will be particularly useful given that situation. So thank you for bringing it up. All right. So this is just the last little piece here about really the magnitude of this issue. So I come from a blue collar family. My uncle is still in the construction business. So as you can imagine, with me as a water guy talking about this stuff, sitting around our holiday dinner tables, the conversations can get quite lively. So my uncle always tells me, what are you worried about? It's not that big of a deal. It's just rainwater. Why do you make such a big deal out of it? Well, let's just look at one little site here. Here is your town hall and library. All right, so this is a Google image of it. So the two buildings and the parking lot in between. If we add up all that impervious area on that site, it's about 116,000 square feet, okay? So 2.5, almost 3 acres. If we get an inch of rain, 72,000 gallons of water are gonna run off that site. 1 inch of rain. You think about how often we get an inch of rain. It's pretty common around here, right? That's an unbelievable amount of water that has to come off that site, and it has to go somewhere. In our average year, we get about 48 inches of rain in an average year, 3.5 million gallons off of 2 small buildings and a parking lot. So now I know as you said, you are a developed town, but go to New York City or go to Bridgeport, go to New York City and multiply those numbers that I just gave you from that one tiny little site. And you'll see just for a simple 1-inch rainstorm, the billions and billions of gallons of water that have to run off and go somewhere. Now you can understand the magnitude of that problem. So it really is a big deal when you add it all together. So now we'll go into what we can do about it. So I'll talk about low impact development and site planning here. This is also called green stormwater infrastructure, but the term low impact development, or LID, started in the 1990s from the state of Maryland. They were dealing with issues with the Chesapeake Bay. So all the goals of low impact development really center around that hydrology that I've talked to you about. So trying to preserve the hydrology of that site before it was developed. That's the bottom line here. All right, so all those things that go into that are what we're trying to focus on. The planning of that site before any development even occurs, and again, I understand you guys aren't in this phase right now, but even with a redevelopment, proper site planning can really go a long way. So just asking, where's the water currently going? Is there a way we can take advantage of the natural system, natural movements of the water that are taking place? Ways, instead of having high cost things to put in, can we design it in such a way that it manages water on site? So this is just one very small example from my colleague's driveway. He has a house in Glastonbury. He needed to repave his driveway. He wanted to put in some pervious pavers, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. But when we talked about it and looked at his driveway, we realized that it wasn't draining to the road. It was actually graded off to the side, and the runoff from here went into the woods. So this driveway was not connected into that stormwater system, and therefore was not really causing problems downstream. He was managing it all right on his lot. So this site design, and again, this everywhere, every site is different, but just sometimes you do have the ability to make a small change in where water is directed, and that can save a lot of money in the long run. So the practices that we'll go through here, we'll talk about bioretention or rain gardens, pervious pavements, green roofs, and rainwater harvesting. So this is a very simple rain garden. This is from a colleague's house, Steve Trinkus, he's an engineer. And if we think about this in terms of cars, this is the base model rain, all right? This is like my first car. You crank the windows down, there was no air conditioning, okay? You were lucky it started when you came out. So this is the base model, not a lot of monetary layout for this one. Pretty simple, maybe 75 bucks for plants. This is the luxury edition. So we got the heated seats, moonroof, and all the bells and whistles of the fancy cars, okay? So this happens to be at the Secretary of State's house in Hartford. She had, this is just a very small postage stamp lot. You can see her neighbor's driveway on the left-hand side right here. So these homes in this era, they were constructed in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The gutter downspouts come down the side of the house. They're angled through the foundation and they go into the sewer line inside of the house. So the roof of that house, that entire building, is fed directly into the sewer system and is part of that combined sewer problem that we have in Hartford and many of our other big cities. So a very simple disconnection of that pipe and directing that water out into the front yard made a tangible difference here at this house. And no, this didn't solve Hartford's water quality problems, one house, but you add all those houses together and look at the potential disconnects that you could do, and then it really starts to add up. This is a small, kind of a medium rain garden, I would say, at the University of Connecticut. I worked with some students to put this one in. On the top left-hand side of the screen, you can see the downspout there connected from the pipe. It was going underground and discharged directly into a local river. And so, and we also quite a few large ones that have been installed. So this is again on the UConn campus near the Student Union. So a very large new building was installed as a redevelopment. So this was a site that the old building came down, a new one went up. And just as you said, Marshall, they were looking for ways to deal with that runoff in a better way. So the water is directed into this large bioretention, and it's been performing quite well through the years. And these are the other things that I was thinking about. So, you know, it's a common misconception. You know, people would say, okay, yeah, you know, rain gardens and all that is great if you got land to put it into. You know, you got new forest land that's being converted into a development. That's an opportunity to install some of these things. We don't have that luxury here. Well, they're doing it in New Haven, downtown New Haven. They are installing these small bioretention areas between the roadway and the sidewalk. They're getting water into the ground wherever they can. Here's another example, Philadelphia, another heavily developed city. They have major issues with combined sewer overflows. They have a big effort underway to handle stormwater, to keep as much of that stormwater as possible out of the system to avoid that problem in the first place. Then also down in Washington, D.C., I was down there for my annual conference in February. Just happened to walk by these, didn't even know that they were there, but you know, 2 blocks off of the mall in a heavily developed area, basically impervious cover everywhere you look. They redeveloped this site and these rain gardens in between the sidewalk and the road. Same thing here. This was down at the wharf, a newly redeveloped area. They put in a pervious pavement bike path here, which I'll explain more about shortly, and then a narrow bioretention or rain garden strip in between that and the sidewalk over here. So it is possible to do these things even in heavily developed areas, all right? So maybe I didn't explain this good enough at the beginning when I first introduced rain gardens, but the goal here is to get that into the ground, very close to where it's generated. So taking water either off the roof of the building or off of the sidewalk or even off of the road, as you saw in New Haven, getting it down into the ground as it did before that site was developed. That's the key. The plants that go into these are, I'm not going to go into the detail on them, but we have a list for Connecticut that we've put together. We also have lists for other states. We've expanded this. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But these are plants that can tolerate wet conditions sometimes, but they can also tolerate dry conditions at other times, ones that are native to this area around the outskirts of wetlands. And I'm a very practical, hands-on guy. I'm not going to try to tell you that all these things are silver bullet. You just put these in and they fix all your problems and pay your kids' college tuition and everything else. This is reality, and everything needs to be maintained. It's just different maintenance. All right. So for bioretention, the plants can be maintained as other landscaped areas. Really up to you how you do that. You need to watch for erosion, just to make sure that it's not cutting out any soil anywhere. But the most important thing is just to make sure that water can still get into it and it has the storage that it was designed to hold. All right. So this is one issue we've had up at UConn, where we had too much mulch being put in a bunch of rain gardens, so they were essentially filled up to the overflow point. We've lost all the storage in there. So you can burn that image out of your mind right now. I'll help you with this red X. And so this is not what we want to do for rain gardens. You want to make sure you've still got the storage that was designed there. Well, looks like I have a pretty good thunderstorm rolling through here right now. So hopefully I will stay online with everyone. Just wanted to let you know, just in case something happens, that's what's going on. One other thing here, these are tree box filters. So this is another nice item for really tightly developed areas. So this is basically a small bioretention in a box. Prefab units that you can buy, pop them right in along the curb line. They allow you to take some water offline, and it lets it sink in underneath, okay? It's not such a big footprint like a bioretention, and maybe doesn't have the aesthetic appeal, but in really heavily developed areas, they can work quite well. We did have some visitors in ours, of the ones that we have up at UConn, So this was a woodchuck that took up residence in mine. I'm not sure how he fared in the next flood that came, but you never know. This is just a variation on that theme. So this is Victor Benny from the town of East Lyme. He basically built his own prefab box here and saved a lot of money. So they're making these in town, installing them wherever they can. And so it's the same idea, just getting that water down in the ground before it leaves the site. Green roofs are another nice tool. So these are especially nice in really developed areas where you've got a lot of rooftops. Our big cities, Chicago used to be the nation's leader with over 1 million square feet. New York City is rapidly taking over as a leader in the country. Europe has a lot of these too. They've been far ahead of us in implementing green roofs. So this is a very thin media, not a thick, heavy soil layer. That's the older style. This is a thin, maybe 4 to 5 inch thick layer of expanded shale and other minerals that allows low plants like sedums to do well up there. But you're not going to grow big trees in a situation like that. But the media is nice and light, which makes it suitable for buildings that don't have, you know, huge concrete floors for structural support. So we do have some of these in Connecticut. We've got quite a few up at UConn. They provide a nice energy benefit too. So it's not the stormwater benefit. So these will capture and release about 50% of the rainfall that falls on them over the course of the year. There's research that was done on this right here at UConn, but they also do have that energy benefit as well. So reduce heating and cooling costs. And there's also habitat value. So the day I took this picture on the bottom left with all those yellow flowers in bloom, that thing was covered with honeybees, not honeybeans. So in a sea of asphalt, this was a nice little refuge for honeybees. And they can also be utilized as nice space. So this rooftop, if this were a traditional black EPDM rubber roof, nobody would want to be sitting out there in the summertime. You would roast out there, it would not be pleasant at all. But now this makes nice habitat for students, for example. This is at Etna in Hartford, so just a nice example there. And there are also several nice alternatives to traditional concrete and asphalt for our pavement surfaces. So I'm going to go through a few of these in detail for you. The one thing that they all have in common, so the top layer is going to vary. So I just show this porous asphalt as the top layer here. But really any of the pavements that I'm going to show you, you could just substitute in that type for the top layer. What's below that top layer is really what's important. So we have this coarse stub base of, usually it's about inch and a half crushed stone. Then there's a 2 to 3 inch choker course. This is also a smaller diameter crushed stone. This is what allows those pervious pavements to function and allows that water to sink down and get down into the native soil. So water can pass through that top pervious pavement layer, and then it gets down in very quickly, can go down into the subgrade. So if you tried to install the regular pervious pavement, that top course, over regular processed gravel, which you would put under a parking lot, it's not going to work well because that processed gravel has a lot of fine material in there. And when it gets packed down, it does not allow water to move down through it very quickly. So that's a key difference here that all these things have in common. So this is the first type. These are permeable interlocking concrete pavers, or PICPs. These are very similar to traditional block pavers that you may have seen on a patio or like a cobblestone, you know, in big gathering areas, but they just have spaces in between so that when you put them together, they get filled with a small crushed stone and water can pass through it, okay? So these are just variations on the theme, same idea here. Here we have some up at UConn. So on the right, you can see these are PICPs, see the little teeth that are holding them apart. So the water will pass down through those openings in between each of the blocks. And you can see the regular asphalt on the left here, sheeting that water off and coming down that center sluiceway here. But there's no water running off this PICP area. So it's a very stark difference.
Can I interject and ask a question, please?
Yes, yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, so Tony Silver from Inland Wetlands and Planning and Zoning. So two questions, and you might be getting to it. One is, Are there any towns in the state that require new development to have permeable surfaces? And two, is there a cost differential between traditional and permeable?
I'll answer your second one first. So it depends on the type of paver. So the paver blocks themselves, so like these blocks that you can see right here in this picture, they are the same price as regular paver blocks, all right, that you might put down on a patio. But to have somebody install that on a sidewalk or a large area, it's going to be more expensive than regular concrete. It's just this manual. They have some automated methods to put them down now, but it's labor intensive. If you're talking about some materials, which I'm going to talk about in a second, like permeable asphalt, permeable concrete, that material cost is about 50% more. Well, this was about 2 years ago. I would imagine it's probably come down even more. But let's assume that it's about 50% more for the material. The base preparation is just different. It's not, maybe it's a little bit deeper. So you've got to have maybe 12 to 8 inch deep, that storage layer below. So that might be more than you would put down on a regular parking lot. I'm not sure what the typical processed gravel depth is. So it might be a little more for those materials. So on a retrofit situation, it would cost you more to go with the pervious option. Where you can save money is in a new installation. And again, I realize you guys aren't so much in this situation right now, but if you're building a new parking lot and you don't need to put in so much of the curb and gutter stormwater, that's where you can save some money too. So that's the situation that can make you come out actually saving money by going the pervious route. So to your first question about towns that have required permeable pavement, I would have to check. We have, my colleague Dave Dixon oversaw some efforts a few years ago looking across the state at regulations related to low impact development. I don't know that there are any towns that specifically require pervious. The new MS4 stormwater regulations, which I'll just touch on briefly at the end, require you to consider these things first. So that has to be written into your regulations. So if you're not in that realm and you know, haven't seen some of the stuff, the webinars and other conferences that we have done about MS4 stormwater stuff, I'll direct you to that site at the end, because those regulations are in place, and that is in place now. And I forget exactly the date when that's supposed to be done, but all the MS4 towns do have to do some of this stuff now. So specifically, if any town has required the permeables, I go offhand, but I can find out for you.
Thank you.
No problem. So this section here, this is by the Gamble Pavilion there. So the sidewalk, this is just a regular sidewalk here. This strip of brick, and it's actually brick paver blocks that are different from the concrete ones. The material is only different, but they still have those spaces in between, and that base material is the same stuff I just showed you. This historically was dirt that got planted with grass every year before graduation. All the foot traffic here caused a lot of erosion, and it was a maintenance nightmare. So they took out and put in these permeable pavers in this, what we call the snow shelf area. And it worked so well, they did it up and down both sides of this road. This is right in the core of campus in the heavily developed area. So this, you wouldn't think that this would be a green solution. You know, you would think grass, but it actually lets a lot more water sink in than grass does here. That because the soil just got so compacted, it didn't allow water to sink in. And so this can take water that runs off of the sidewalk now, it lets it infiltrate down. There are also plastic grids. Again, these go over that permeable base. These can be filled with topsoil and planted with grass or with gravel. So this is an example at West Farms Mall. This is a low traffic area here. This is their overflow parking. The grass can do okay in there in a low traffic area, but if you've got high traffic, it kind of gets beat up with the vehicles on there. And the plastic ones are okay, again, in a low traffic area. But if you're high traffic and if you're doing a lot of plowing in the winter, these can be a little problematic. This is another variation on that theme, just our proprietary products, same idea. This is pervious asphalt. So this is a variation on the mix that leaves out the sand out of the mix. So it's just the aggregate material and an asphalt binder that holds it together. So it maintains some of that porosity, and it allows the water to pass directly through that pavement, okay? So the nice thing about this is it goes down with the same equipment as regular asphalt. So that's a huge plus. The guys can use the exact same equipment. And Tilcon, one of the biggest pavement companies in the state, they put this lot, they put a couple of ours in up Yukon. So they're very much very knowledgeable about how to do this, and they got the mix dialed in pretty nicely these days. So it's a pretty easy product to get these days where it was not before. Here's another few examples up at Yukon. So a couple of parking lots near our student dorms. And these are the travel lanes that were paved with pervious here. In the center lane, or sorry, the parking lanes were pervious. The travel lane was regular asphalt here. So that can save you a little money too. Pervious concrete is also an option. So this, just like the asphalt leaves the sand out of the mix, same thing for this. So if you mixed up concrete before, you know that it's some sort of stone aggregate, it's Portland cement, it's sand and water. This leaves the sand out of the mix. So it's just Portland cement, water, and aggregate, but it's a very specific ratio. So, you know, regular concrete, if you're off one way or the other, you know, you saw in there and it cures and you're fine. This stuff is very finicky. The ratio is extremely important, and it goes down with a different technique than regular concrete. So it's really, really should be done by someone who has experience in how to install pervious concrete. So the National Ready Mix Concrete Association maintains a list of certified pervious concrete installers that you can refer to if you'd like to find someone in our area or in your area. Because of issues, we've had a couple of failed projects that when they did not go well. This company up in Yarmouth, Maine started making precast pervious concrete sections. So these are 5 feet by 8 feet. They build them in their facility. They have all the quality control. They cure for enough time. That's another issue with the pervious. It really needs to cure for a much longer time as compared to regular concrete. So they make these in their facility. They deliver to the site. You prepare your base. You can see this crushed stone down here. You drop it in place, and you've got an instant parking area or sidewalk or whatever it may be. So we've installed a bunch of these up at Yukon. Here's a lot where we replace all the parking stalls here with their precast slabs. It's been holding up extremely well. We're really happy with this product so far. So again, just like with the bioretention, I'm not going to sugarcoat it that you put it in and about it. The pavement surface will hold up fine. So that's one thing that we've seen. Because of that base material, you don't have the frost heaving in the winter like you do with regular lots. We don't have cracking. We have a 10-year-old lot with pervious asphalt. There's not a crack in it, not a frost heave in it, 10 years old. That's unheard of. But if you neglect the maintenance and do not vacuum it out, you're not going to get the infiltration of water that you want to have. So first of all, you don't want to sand them in the winter. They can be salted. They don't actually need as much salt because that water, when it melts, has a place to go. So you don't have the refreezing like you do on regular asphalt. But you don't want to be sanding them at all. And you want to make the clean needs to be done. How often is just dependent on how much sediment gets loaded onto it. It's a high traffic area, will need to be done more often. But it needs to be done with not just a regular street sweeper, but a regenerative air sweeper that really can suck out that material and get it out of the cracks in the crevices.
Is there a special salt that's required?
No, there's no, for the asphalt, it doesn't matter. You can use the same regular salt, sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, any of the.
I had a very bad experience with my tenant putting lots of salt on the steps of this house. The porch fell apart, and doing a little research, you find out there's only certain salts that we should be using on concrete.
Concrete, yes. But with asphalt, yes. Sorry, I'm thinking of asphalt. With the asphalt, it doesn't matter, but you're correct. With concrete, you have to be careful, especially if it's fresh. You know, if it's recently installed, it's more susceptible to the salt. Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm going to disagree with that maybe, but that's like the stuff you buy for cat's paws and that cat stuff, that
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I know that up at UConn and many other places, they have just been using the standard sodium chloride, and it's been holding up okay. But yeah, I'm not sure which of those other products would be the best. In general, though, the best thing is just to use less of it, and that will definitely lessen the problems. You don't need as much for sure with these pervious products. But that's a very good point. Was it John that asked that?
Yes, it's John. And I just had a
Okay.
bad experience with it. I had to replace an entire porch because my tenant over salted it, and I didn't realize it really. I went over one day and like the stairs were melting away on it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Mike, I have a
yeah. It can be quite corrosive.
Mike, I have a question. Are you concerned about the sodium chloride increasing when you're salting impermeable pavement and you have drinking water wells nearby?
That's a really good question, Richard. And yeah, that's something that we've actually done research on this up at UConn. A colleague of mine and me have done this, and it really is, it's site specific. So what we found at UConn, and this would generalize well to you guys. So in a developed area where you already may have an elevated level of salt in the groundwater, in the wintertime, your pervious lots going to add some more to it. But over the rest of the year, when you've got all that rainwater that's coming through and flushing down through it, it's actually improving the situation in the shallow groundwater. However, if you've got drinking water wells nearby, you definitely want to pay attention, especially if it's not in a real heavily developed area and your groundwater is pretty pristine. I would certainly evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. And in fact, this was just the case up at UConn. We had a situation where there was a building being designed, and it was near the edge of campus, and the grade was away, and there were some homes nearby. And I recommended not using a permeable product because I know it gets salt there. So we're dealing with the water in a different way. But yeah, on a case-by-case basis, if you've got sensitive wells nearby. Good question. So if you do neglect it, you need to bring out stronger equipment to maintain that. So I'm not sure if the play for you. I don't know if you can hear the sound or not, but the sound isn't too important. But these guys are coming in. This is high pressure water and high suction, cleaning it all out. So big trucks always equal big money in my experience. Again, this is my uncle's construction business. You know, whenever he shows up at your door, it's $1,000 no matter what happens. So you want to try to stay on top of that maintenance. So here's one of these lots up at UConn before the maintenance was done. Here it is after. So it really did renovate the infiltration capacity. And lastly here, rainwater harvesting. Again, this can be done on a very small scale on residential lots. Not going to make a huge difference, but every little bit counts. And other areas and some of the big cities and some of even our universities around the country are utilizing some large cisterns to capture that water and reuse it for irrigation purposes. So it can be reused as a useful product. I'll just show you a couple of our tools that we have available that can assist you in highlighting some of these things that I've talked about and seeing what's in around your area and around the state. So first of all, we developed an app for rain gardens. So we've been doing educational outreach on this stuff for quite a few years, but in the advent of the smartphone era, we decided to take this information online. So we did have this for both platforms, for iPhone and Android. Currently, the Android one is not working, but the iPhone version is still working right now. So there's all this is your main screen that you would get. So some of the basic information is in there, but the really cool tools are in the design section here. So there's a sizing calculator, which you can use if you know how big your drainage area is. Let's say it's 25 by 30. You can select your storm size and your storage depth, and it will tell you how big your rain garden should be. It also, your GPS. Oh, go ahead, Richard, sorry.
Sorry, will there be an Android app? Will it be working in the future?
I'm hoping so, because I'm the lone Android guy in my office. So I've been pushing hard to get this back up and running. We do have somebody working on it now. If you check back with me, I'll give you an update in a couple of weeks.
Okay, is there a PC version or an online version as
Yes,
well?
and I will show you that on the next slide. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So the other thing that this can do, and the website can do this also, it zooms in on the imagery and you can tap out on the area that you want to treat. So let's say you're using this back roof here and you'd like to redirect that runoff to a rain garden. You tap that out and the app will tell you how big it is and how big the rain garden should be to treat it. It also pulls in the soil drainage class from the USDA soils layers. So you can see roughly what your drainage is on your site, whether you're well drained, poorly drained. So just a rough estimate to give you an idea. And it also has a plant database in there. So all these plants that I mentioned before that are good for this area are in here. You can click on them, more information, sort by bloom color, by shade, sun, that sort of thing too. So here's that website. So all that same information that's in the app is available on their website, mo.yukon.edu/rain gardens. Gotcha. So the other thing you can use, this is something we started here in Connecticut, and then we expanded and offered up to all of our partners around the country. So we have thousands of entries in here now. So this is just a mobile, or it's a low impact development atlas. So people have entered in where they've installed rain gardens or permeable pavements, that sort of thing. And you can zoom into your town, your area, and see what's installed near you. So it's lidmap.yukon.edu. So this is accessible just through the regular website if you go to it on a PC. And if you look at it on a cell phone, it automatically will adjust. And the mobile version is quite slick. So you can see what's nearby you. Click on the little balloon and you can see some information about it, a picture and a description. And you can actually add your own practice to it. So if you have something in your town that you know should be on there and is not, you can add it. So you can log in using a Google login and add that information. It's pretty cool. And as I mentioned before, the new MS4 rules are out there. For those of you who are involved, you may have felt like this for the first couple of years of this, but we've been funded by the state to actually do outreach on this. So you may have heard of Amanda Ryan doing some outreach on this. We have a great website, nemo.yukon.edu/MS4. This is organized around those 6 minimum control measures. So if you're involved with the MS4 stuff, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. If you're not, this is probably sounds like Greek to you, but just trust me that those of you in the town who are involved with it, everything you need to know about is in here. So lots of templates in here, mapping tools, tutorials, and other great things that can really help you through this. And as I mentioned before, this is where LID does come into play with those regulations. So towns are now required to put into their regulations that people that are bringing stuff to their boards, that they require consideration of low impact development first. So they have to justify why they couldn't use it. You have to reduce or eliminate barriers to LID in the regulations. And you have to retain the water quality volume on site for new and redevelopments. So this is basically the first inch of runoff off the site. And it does vary for heavily developed, so that would come into play for you guys. So the restrictions are, I think it's the first ½ inch that you have to retain if you've got over 50% impervious cover on that site. But these things are in play. And the last thing here, towns are now required to reduce directly connected impervious area by 1% starting this summer, July 1st. They did allow a 5-year look back so the towns can take credit for things that happened all the way back to 2012. So if you know there were any projects of things that I talked about tonight, that definitely can be used and counted towards your MS4 requirements. So to wrap it up, how are we doing here on time? Pretty good, just under an hour. So that's what I find is kind of the limit with Zoom. Everybody starts to get a little squirrely after an hour of this. So we've drastically altered the hydrologic cycle. just by the nature of our developments. Low impact development practices definitely work. They enhance aesthetics, increase property values in some cases, and they can cost less. They don't always cost less, but they can in certain situations. They still need maintenance. I'm not trying to sugarcoat everything here for you. Many towns in the state have made regulation changes to encourage LID, and I'm going to get you I'll find the link for that. We do have a page that has what's called a story map, so you can go through there and see what towns in the state have made these changes that are LID friendly. I should have had that link in here. I apologize. And lastly, the new MS4 regulations are encouraging LID implementation. So that's all I have for the formal part of the talk, and I'm happy to answer other questions you might have.
Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. A couple years ago, I put a rain garden because we put in an addition in our house. I worked with engineering on this, and the actual installation was not horribly expensive, but the engineering, you know, even for residential rain garden, can be $3,000 to $4,000. And I'm wondering.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and I got a lower quote for less than that. But on your tool, would that potentially meet the requirements? So you could, say a homeowner could potentially self-design it if you had some, you know, environmental background?
Definitely. Yeah, I guess it really just depends on what the town requires. So all the tools are in there in that website and in the app. You don't even really need an environmental background necessarily. I think if you can follow the instructions and do, you know, the app and the website really do the calculations for you. So it's pretty straightforward. I think most people can probably do okay with it. And you know, we're here as a resource too. We have some recorded webinars where I go through in more detail talking about how to design and install rain gardens.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have folks in your town that are interested in that, I'm happy to direct them to some of our materials that we have.
Because, you know, it's a great idea, you know, to control runoff, and they can be relatively simple, but the design, you know, when you get an engineer and PE involved,
Yeah,
they
definitely.
charge more than geologists do.
Right. Yeah, for a residential one, in most cases, you don't really need an engineer. It's, you know, there are certain applications where you might need some heavy equipment, but other rain gardens have been, you know, I've put in many of these just by hand. It just depends on each site. Every site is a little different.
And for what it's worth, it did survive. It was finished about 3 weeks before a 5 to 7 inch rainfall event back in, was it October of 2018, I think it was.
Okay.
And it actually survived.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yep.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. Other questions?
Yes. Marshall.
Yep.
Okay. This is going to sound a little odd in the beginning and not. I'm concerned about two things. I'm an old shoe dog. I started in a family business way back when. I haven't been in that forever. But when it comes to fashion, everything goes in a cycle. I am looking at various systems, and from an economic development standpoint, I like this. But I'm also concerned what happens when the spike heel comes back again. And the liability to the town or the developer or the property owner when those heels or other things are going to get caught in these openings, and the trips and falls and the insurance liability and the lawsuits. It concerns me. We're not planting that spacing with grass. We're leaving it open. We're vacuuming it out. And I'm worried about that liability. What if we found over time? Are there insurance stats? Are there a problem with increased slip and falls and things like that?
I've heard that question raised a lot.
Okay, good.
Well, I wouldn't say a lot. I've heard it raised. I have not heard of a case of anyone actually getting a stiletto heel stuck in some of these holes. Maybe it's happened somewhere. It's just not something I've heard about. If that's a concern, then the The ones that have the tighter pores, like the pervious concrete, pervious asphalt, those are better because those pores are too, you couldn't get a heel down into those.
Okay, well, this is why I was asking.
That could be a
Because it's
better
all
option.
cyclical in fashion. It will come back. And it'll be, common, not an unusual person wearing them.
I'm sure the ladies are not sad that stiletto heels are on the way out. I would not want to have to wear one of those things for very long.
Nope, never worn one, never will. Never have to worry about it. I think there's greater liability when mail trucks go underwater in Trumbull Center than heels going into. Because our town center is in a major flood basin. So,
Gotcha.
but anyway, but I have to say, Marshall is 100% right in terms of what development we're seeing in this town. It is redevelopment.
Yep.
Our commercial properties are transforming into high density apartment dwellings. And, I think a lot of us are seeing as these areas are developed, I'm thinking mostly of like where Henderson Lumber is and Cannon was, those landscapes were corporate or commercial, and we didn't really see them. We didn't notice them. Now this new development is very dense and it goes to the edges of the property. So we're seeing this Merritt Parkway development where we never knew Cannon was in there before. Henderson Lumber, we see now from the Route 8 interchange. So we're pushing the edges of the envelope here in terms of redevelopment, which I think is a good thing to redevelop sites. But
Sure.
It seems that the redevelopment seems to be more extreme because the property is a lot more expensive. So they're using every possible inch that they can. So I love seeing illustrations of, these bioretention areas because you're adding trees and shrubs and green areas back that are not just pretty, but they're highly beneficial for
That's exactly right.
stormwater management, for carbon sequestration, for all those other things. So it's, some of these things might be expensive going in, but they're multifunctional. So
That's exactly right. Yep.
if we could factor in the cost savings there, that would be a great benefit, I think.
Yeah. And there's also the other benefits that are hard to quantify. The aesthetics are really, it's a big improvement in many cases, and it makes a pleasant area to be. It's a place that people want to be around. Sometimes it's hard to quantify those things, but they can really be important, especially in our really, our heavily developed areas. That's why I really make a point to show the stuff like from DC and Philadelphia and even New Haven. They're going in, they're very successful. They're getting buy-in from the residents that are nearby. This is the New Haven example. So it can work. It's not easy. I'm not going to tell you they're all easy, but I just want to let you know that you can do it on a really developed site with a little creative thinking.
Mike, I'm sorry, question?
Yeah, go. While you're asking your questions, I'm just going to try to find that other link that I mentioned to you. So go ahead and I can hopefully do two things at once here.
Okay, so it's very simply, what should local land use boards do in terms of modifying regulations to become proactive on low impact development and hydrology management?
I would say to look to there's a section in the MS4 website about that. So I can't remember if we have model ordinances there or not, but there are suggestions. The site that I'm looking for right now actually will be a big help for you, I think, because you can see what other towns have done.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of regulations, but anyway.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. That's the site that I'm trying to find now shows you what towns have changed in their regulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so the MS4 one will be one place to start, and then the site too. I think I found it here.
I'd like to make a comment about pervious
Sure.
pavement. Being on a land use board on the Inland Wetlands Commission, I feel a little apprehensive about using that technique because we would allow it, and who's going to regulate it? You know, they're going to be sanding these parking lots, and they're going to fill in, and they're going to lose their ability to become pervious anymore. And I don't see the town going out and enforcing that.
Yeah, the maintenance can be a problem. You know, some places have built-in maintenance requirements, something to do with the bonding. I can't remember exactly how they've done it, but other ones that have been funded by state funds, like you have to show the maintenance, document the maintenance plan. You know, there are ways to get around that to require, to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain.
I would imagine it would only be feasible for commercial sites, and if a homeowner wanted to go that route, I don't think we'd ever be able to enforce that.
Yeah, that's probably true. The good thing is on the homeowner side, they're probably going to be installing a rain garden. You know, not too many homeowners are probably going to put permeable pavements in. So the maintenance of the rain garden is pretty easy, and, you know, it can be handled by most people. And honestly, if they're taking care of it as landscaping in their yard and not totally neglecting it, it'll still be infiltrating water, which is what we want.
I think just a comment for Trumbull. I think, you know, the bioretention things that Mike was showing, you know, along highways, maybe control runoff. There's a critical runoff area that we may have enough volume to soak it into the ground and not have it run off. Could help, you know, rain gardens and things. But there was one site, I can't think of the name, Mariel, and there was that site where they want to develop that couple acre parcel and use permeable pavement for that, and that wouldn't have worked there, you know, because of they were going to sand it, because the driveway would have been on a, you know, steep slope. That wouldn't have worked there. But there are simple things that we can do in Trumbull, you know, that would meet, you know, our goals and can actually look kind of nice. Now, just what it's worth, my rain garden is not so much a garden as a 20-foot diameter hole in the ground with decorative rock. And so they can have plants, but the plants make it a little bit harder to, you know, maintain it. So sometimes decorative rocks.
They are multifunctional, I think is the key. Yeah.
Make one more comment about detention. You really didn't seem to mention about any galleys underneath commercial parking lots. They almost call them ponds underneath them.
Yep.
Is that a better way of doing LID than the pervious pavement, for example?
It can certainly be done. And I guess the only thing I would say, it still needs to be thought about maintenance wise. So if it's neglected and it gets clogged up underneath, it's, you know, I mean, you don't fix that. It kind of is just done. So if you know, if the sand, you know, usually those have like a Vortechnics or some sort of unit like that as a pre-treatment to settle out any heavy particles before it would go into there. So they can work. It can be a, you know, a perfectly good way to infiltrate that water underneath the lot. I kind of like being able to see it, you know, like go into a bioretention area where you're getting other benefits of that wild, you know, the habitat, those other things. But there are certain situations where, you know, the galleys under a parking lot are your best option. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, John. I probably should have mentioned that, especially for you guys. But they can work. The maintenance is important for those two.
I have a question.
Did you find that site that I'll just show you this very quickly so you have it as a reference. I'm going to share my screen quickly because I don't see a way to paste it into a chat box here. So if you go to our website, clear.uconn.edu, so there's lots of great stuff on here. I'm not going to complicate things. But if you go all the way to the bottom right, you can see this one that says the state of low impact development. So if you click on that, this will bring you to what's called a story map. You can read about what other towns have done. and there's actual live links out to all those regulation changes that they've made in regards to low impact development. So that might be useful for all of you. Was there one more question? Was it Joanne?
Yeah. Hi. I'm always looking for unit costs for when I have to do estimates for anything like this. Is there anywhere on your site where you show average or typical unit costs for any of these?
We really don't put those, up there because it can be so variable. You know, as I mentioned before, and I was talking to Richard about there are some bioretention areas that we've done all by hand, and it was, a few $100s for plants. And there are others like the Secretary of State's where she had to have a mini excavator brought in and a contractor involved, and it cost $5,000. So I don't want to scare people off by putting in a high price or too low a price. So we've kind of leaned away from having those cost estimates on there.
I just want to make a comment.
I know it could be useful.
One comment and then I'm done.
Sure.
My experience has been the weeding of these things can be very difficult because invasives can move in. You don't even know they're an invasive until they're overrunning it. I think it's a really good idea to keep your planting in masses. Try to keep it simple and try to get too detailed so that you can easily identify one plant from another. And by masses, like that last photograph you showed was what brought it to mind. That was a nice opportunity for the linear, the palette. It's not always like that in a rain garden, but just something to keep in mind.
Yep. Thank you.
I'd like to say one thing before you hang up.
Sure.
This is Fred Garrity from Planning and Zoning. I think this is all really great, and it's always good. I agree with Commissioner Silber about we should probably look into what we can do to support this. But, we have online here our town engineers. We have Tatiana and Bill Maher. And one of the things that, I like using metaphors. This is what we're talking about here is kind of like the life preserver in a first aid kit that's going to go inside the lifeboat. We already have our rules and regulations for stormwater drain off that are enforced by regulation. And we're just trying to make sure that if we can, get some of that out of the stormwater flow, and one of the things that I've heard a couple times here is cost. So I would love to see if we can get some recommendations from you and the engineers on where we can put encouraging language rather than requirement language, because there are so many drawbacks to cost and enforcement and viability for inspection and things like that. If we can do encouragement, because what we have found is if we empower staff to have the authority of encouragement, that developers will take heed to the encouragement language presented by our town planner or the town engineers and simply incorporate that before it comes to a meeting. Rather than we're never going to be able to design a process at a planning and zoning meeting or even at an inland wetlands meeting. The authority is probably, the approval of the plan, and stormwater rests with the engineers. Does it meet the state's requirements? And until the state requires this, it's going to be very hard for us and any of the smaller municipalities that are in competition with each other for redevelopment and development to require things that are, hey, if you want to develop in Trumbull, it's going to cost you an extra $10,000 per square foot, as opposed to if you went to Shelter. Those are the things that, we all have to be cognizant of, but we all want to protect because we've all seen the water flow through Trumbull Center. It's a great point. What can we do to take some of that flow off? So, I think not slicing the baby, but the solution going forward is what can we have as recommendable language that we can give through our town engineers and town planners to these developers when they are coming in? Because once it's in front of all of us, the ship has sailed. If they're meeting the state requirements, it's going to be really hard for us to change our language. So, the helpful hints on the way in are probably our best path forward.
Yeah.
I have a question, kind of probably for Bill. Has anybody looked at in Trumbull Center, what are the top two causes of the high runoff we had back in that huge rain event? What?
The duration was so short
Yeah.
and the intensity was so large that that was like a 500-year storm.
Yeah.
We're not going to design for that. We
Yeah.
never will.
No.
Yeah.
But
That
to
wasn't
Mr.
Trumbull's.
Garrity's point, our stormwater regulation, one of the first sentences in there strongly encourages LID.
That's great.
Right.
That's great. The other thing we've done for a couple of towns, basically it's a checklist. It was a brief description and then a checklist that the town could give to developers, just like you said, Fred. When here's what you got to look at if you want to develop in this town. This is what we're encouraging, and it steps them through the basics, and it's a checklist that they can go through and say, have you considered this for the site? Why, if not, why, why do you think it won't work? Blah, blah, blah. So if that's something that's useful, we can share that, the one that we developed for the town of Mansfield. And you can, feel free to reformat, do whatever might work for you.
Appreciate it. All right. I'm going to have to go, but thank you. This was very good. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the great questions.
Fred. Yeah, this was really great. So Mike, what other programs do you have like this? I mean, I think you might have a captive audience for a couple of months here.
Well, on that CLEAR website, I would suggest going to that, because we just had a new webinar series that my colleague has developed. That's these short mini webinars. We have been doing webinars for years, but the socially distanced webinars are new, and they're short little clips, 30 minutes or less. So there's a whole bunch of them that are in there now. So I encourage you to explore the CLEAR website. There's a lot of great stuff in there.
Okay. Well, this is great. Does anybody else have any more questions? No, I'm so impressed at the turnout. And Mike, I mean, we have planning and zoning and inland wetland, the chairs and co-chairs on here, economic development, conservation, town engineers, everybody showed up to the party tonight.
That's fantastic.
So I really
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And all the towns have challenges, and I think we have some really good guidelines in place, as Fred said, and both of our town engineers are on here, and we're all on the same page, but certainly having a description and a checklist and some way to, as Fred said, develop encouraging language is what will make the difference, because, as Bill said, the storms are different. They are high volume in high velocity in short period of time. And so these aren't your grandmother's storms anymore. So, we can wait for new regs to come in, or we can try and be a little proactive here with, letting nature do what it can do by setting aside some of the natural systems to manage the stormwater as best it can. So thank you. This was really great. I'm glad.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike.
I'm glad it worked out well.
Thank you, Mike, very much.
Great.
You're welcome. I'll send along that information for you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Good night.
Hi, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.